Wow. Can you hear me? Is this okay? Yeah, this is great. Dimming the lights is so effective. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our presentation and to iQuHACK 2023. We sponsored for many years, but this is the first year we've been able to be in person because of the pandemic. So it's really exciting to see so many of you here. My name is Matt. I'm a software engineer at IonQ. I've been here about 5.5 years helping to build quantum computers. And I'm going to start today by doing a sort of ion trap quantum computing 101. This is an ion trap. This is one of the ion traps that we make at IonQ. And this is actually a very old technology. So we all rely on ion traps in some way every single second of every single day, because at the core of the atomic clocks that basically make the internet work and our servers and most things in the world is a little ion trap, a linear Paul trap. The design goes back decades. Obviously, they've improved since then, but ion traps are very mature technology. And in fact, this is the reason that the first quantum operation ever done was on an ion trap. Our co-founder, Chris Monroe, was at NIST, Dave Wineland's group, doing atomic clock experiments when somebody theorized that you could modify an atomic clock apparatus slightly to do a quantum operation. And that happened in, I believe, 1995. And over the next few decades, that went from a one-off experiment into now multiple companies around the world building ion trap quantum computers, as well as countless academic groups. So this is an old technology in many ways and a very mature technology. So the way we actually use this, we package the ion trap in a vacuum chamber. And I'm sorry this is so yellow, but this is like, the trap itself, maybe the key areas like the size of your thumb. So you're looking at something like the size of a deck of cards. And the reason we put it in vacuum will become clear in a moment, because what we're going to do is trap individual atoms in this vacuum chamber, in this trap. And so we need a very, very high vacuum because otherwise, how can we tell our own atoms from other things bouncing around? So we really want to have nothing in the vacuum, ideally, except for the ions that become our quantum computer. So I'm now going to switch from sort of real photographs to beautiful illustrations by me. This is a block of ytterbium. This is inside the vacuum chamber. And in fact, there's lots of different ways to do ion trap quantum computing. There's groups using calcium and other minerals. We're using ytterbium here. We've also talked publicly about using barium. But for this example, we're going to talk about ytterbium-171. This is a very heavy, rare earth metal with 2 electrons in the outermost shell, which will become relevant in a sec. This is actually commonly used, as I said, in atomic clocks. So I believe, I don't know if it's the current record, but over the last decade, a number of times the world's most accurate atomic clock has been in a ytterbium-based clock. So we have this block of ytterbium and we heat it up. And we can do this with electricity. We can do this with a laser beam. Basically, with your ion trap experiment, you're going to start with a source, in this case, ytterbium, and heat it up. And that is going to cause a plume of ytterbium to form. So now we have these hot atoms floating out of this block. And now we can do cool stuff with the chemistry of ytterbium. We zap it with an ionizing laser. That's what this beautiful purple bar represents. We are stripping off one of those 2 outermost electrons. Now we have hot, positively charged ytterbium. The reason it has to be charged is we're doing ion trapping with ions, logically, and it's that positive charge that allows us to easily control and move these ions around with electromagnetic fields. So we have this now hot, positively charged ytterbium floating by, and as it floats it along, we're going to zap it again with another laser to cool it. So some of you may know about laser cooling if you're doing AMO physics stuff, but if you're unfamiliar, basically like shooting photons at something to make it slow down, because at the atomic level, temperature is motion effectively. You can think of it like throwing baseballs if someone is trying to walk towards me and I have an endless street of baseballs and I throw at them, they're going to slow down. Effectively, we're doing the same thing here with photons. Hot atoms are going one way and photons are going the other. And the atoms absorb those photons in one direction of travel and then re-emit them in a random direction. All that random re-emission cancels out and you just have photonic pressure pushing the atoms down. So now we have slower moving, cooler terbium, still floating, and now we can capture it in an electromagnetic field because it's not moving so quickly that it'll just pop out of my field. So here I have a video. Let's see. Okay, yeah, so you are looking at individual atoms of a terbium that are glowing right now. You'll notice it's kind of grainy. I turned up the gain in the video because otherwise it just looks like, a bunch of dots. And they're glowing because they're fluorescing. So even those of you who have, does MIT require chemistry? Is that required? Yeah, okay, cool. So you know more about this than me. I hadn't taken chemistry since high school, but basically the outermost electron is fluorescing as it absorbs a photon, pops up, falls back down, and re-emits that photon. And in fact, again, this is the principle of atomic clocks. So that fluorescence is entirely regular. That's how we define what a second is by the oscillations of the fluorescent oscillations of an atom. I guess I can keep this going for the folks on the stream, maybe. Okay, cool. So there's actually different strategies. You'll notice here, we've taken our cool ytterbium and trapped it in a line. So this is what we call like an ion chain. And basically, you could imagine a saddle-shaped electromagnetic field that's kind of like a bowl that's holding them in place, and we're compressing them on all sides to form this nice long line. You'll also notice the ones on the end are sort of pushed out a little bit. That's because they're all, ions. They're all positively charged. So the charge is accumulating and kind of exerting a stronger force on the edge. So we actually, for purposes of computation, add extra ions on both sides that don't serve as our qubits. Those are just there to help press everything else and have them nice and evenly spaced, which makes it easier to do ion trap quantum computing. There's other ways to do it. Our friends at Quantinuum, who are presenting, I think, simultaneously, as opposed to a long chain of ions, they store their ions in various places on their trap and then bring them together to do a single gate. But the basic principles are the same. We're storing the ions and holding them in some kind of electromagnetic potential. Sorry. So now I'm going to kind of show another video, an illustration, basically. So the way we're going to do our computation is by bringing laser light in to the ion trap. This part you've seen, you saw a real video of this. And then basically we can manipulate all the ions in various ways. We have a few different lasers. One, the initialization laser is going to pump them all down to a 0 state. And then we're going to apply various gates that we'll talk about in a second, but basically manipulate the what we consider the qubit state of each qubit with that laser beam. And then at the very end, we're going to measure all the qubits at once. And basically, if they're bright, they're in the 1 state. If they're dark, they're in the 0 state. So here at the end, you'll see we now illuminate our whole chain. And some of them are glowing. And this effectively is a 0, 1, 0, 1, et cetera, string of output. Okay, cool. So I showed those bright and dark states on the last video. And that's how we know if it's a 0 or 1. So in classical computing, those of you who are either doing like digital system design or had to do it like me as part of your software engineering degree, that's all with voltages, right? High and low voltages. And we distinguish in a regular computer, like my laptop or your phone, between that 0 and 1 by kind of some kind of high pass or low pass filter on a high or low voltage. In our case, we just use the fluorescence of the ions. And so you'll see in this little picture on the right, there's actually really good separation between a 0 state and a 1 state. So on the left, we have the diagram of the atom, but the important thing is we're going to drive the ions with a laser. And if they're in the 0 state, they're not going to fluoresce. And if they're in the 1 state, they're going to fluoresce quite nicely. And consequently, we see this nice histogram on the right of lots of photons coming off the 1 state. And on the left, just a handful. So it's very easy for us to make that threshold and distinguish between 0 and 1. And it's really quite similar to how we do it in some ways to regular classical computing. Okay, we're not actually going to do any of the physics here, but the important thing to note is we use a laser to pump all the qubits down to 0. So we want to make sure that all the qubits are cool and in the 0 state before we do our computations. And it's important to note this is one of the many advantages of ion-trap quantum computing, that basically we're able to initialize to a 0 state with an extremely high degree of accuracy. There's an expression in the industry, SPAN, which you may be familiar with, which stands for state preparation and measurement. And due to really the beauty of using atomic qubits, the accuracy of that state preparation step and that measurement step is almost 100%, easily 99.3, 99.5, 99.9% in latest hardware, which means you really have a really good idea of what your qubit is. There's very little error in measuring and very little error in preparing in the 0 state. Okay, so how do we do logical operations? So on the right is a picture of a laser we use. This is a commercial lithography laser. And basically, we are driving a transition for single qubit operations between that 0 and 1 state. And effectively, when we illuminate a qubit, an ion, with this laser beam, it starts oscillating between the 0 and 1 state in a nice sinusoidal pattern that we call Rabi flopping. And basically, by choosing the duration of that pulse, we can put the qubit in any state we want, a perfect superposition of 0 and 1, 0 state, 1 state, etc. That's our single qubit gate. Okay, there's a lot of fun math on this slide, but you can come talk to us after if you're interested in the actual physics. In the front, I have Daiwei and Shiny, also from IonQ, if you wouldn't mind raising your hands. Yes, and they're happy to talk to you about it. So the important thing to note on this slide is that all the ions are part of the same chain, and so they're part of the same quantum system. That means we can couple their movements to each other and perform entangling operations on any pair. So for example, if we take any two ions in the 0 state, through that Rabi flopping we were just talking about, we can put, for example, the first ion in a superposition of 1 and 0. We then entangle the 1 state with the motion of that ion and not the 0 state, so that basically the 1 state is jiggling and the 0 state is still. We then do a gate where we transfer the motion of the first ion to another ion, because that first ion is in that superposition of 0 and 1, and a superposition of having motion and not having motion. The second ion becomes a superposition of having motion and not, that is entangled with that first ion. Then we take the motion out of the system because we basically want them to be sitting there still like they were at the very beginning. And what we're left with is a superposition of 0 and 1 and the two ions, and an entanglement of the two ions. And that's, in a nutshell, how we do two qubit interactions. But the important takeaway is this picture, what it means in practice. You can run gates between any pair of ions, any qubit in the system. So it's much like playing notes on a piano, where you can press any two keys you want at the same time. With solid state, like for example, with superconducting qubits, the qubits are physically printed on a chip and connected by physical wires, right? So what that means is if I have a qubit over here on my physical chip and a qubit over here, I can't simply run a gate between these two. I have to take into account that I'm going to need to swap the state of the first qubit into an intermediate qubit and another to connect over here. Okay, this has kind of two effects. One is I end up consuming a large overhead in qubits just to do operations. And secondly, every time I do that, I'm introducing error, because as y'all probably know, none of today's quantum computers are fully fault tolerant. Every operation we do has some amount of error in it, and that error compounds over time, eventually becoming pure noise. In today's ion-trap quantum computers, the lasers are the wires. The light is the wire. So in fact, any pair can be connected. And in kind of academic settings, we demonstrated things like connecting multiple, more than just two ions, 3, 4, 5, etc. ions. That's because, again, they're all in that same well. And so as long as we can shine light at the same time and couple their motion, we can run a gate. Okay, the final gate to call out is kind of the Z gate, the rotation in the Z axis. And this we kind of get for free. So basically, you can think of it as like a clock that is tracking the qubits. As long as we are keeping track of how long the qubit has been illuminated by the laser beam, we know it's processing through this Z rotation. And so it's purely a mathematical operation to decide like how long of pause between operations to get the advancement or not that we want. Okay, so in practice, for this hackathon, and most likely for most of your professional lives, should you go into quantum algorithm development and application development, you'll be using higher level gates. And in fact, in all likelihood, 10 years from now, we won't be talking even about gates because, for example, when folks are building, FPGAs today, people are using Verilog. They're not thinking in terms of AND gates or gates, not gates. Certainly, if any of you have written programs for your computer, even if you're writing in assembly, you're working at a much higher level than the actual logical operations, the transistor level operations on your CPU or ALU. So in practice today, for this hackathon, you will most likely be using a library like Qiskit or Cirq, and you'll be using high-level gates. So if you've taken a course on quantum information science, you're probably familiar with these gates. We have a link on the slide, and we'll post it on the website to kind of all the gates we support, which is certainly more than enough. All of these eventually compile down to the physical gates we were talking about earlier. But it's much easier typically to think in terms of these higher level gates than lower level gates. Broadly speaking, we are hoping that one of you, or perhaps a group of you, over the coming years and decades, thinks of better abstractions for quantum computing than we have today. This is basically the best model we have, and it's kind of like programming a computer in 1940 or something like that. Okay, so to summarize, ion trap computing itself. We believe that ions make the best qubits. For one, because we're working with an element, every qubit is identical. With solid state quantum computers, for example, particularly superconducting systems, we're heating and cooling the chip, and every time we cool down, the qubit is a little different. And every qubit is different than every other qubit because we're coercing trillions of atoms into behaving like a single quantum system. With the ion trap based quantum computing, every qubit is inherently identical because these are just elements. Every atom of the terbium is the same as every other atom if it's the same isotope. And so as long as we can have good isotope purity, we can guarantee that the qubits are identical. We have an easy task of isolation. So as many of you know, isolating a quantum computer from its environment is an essential part of having a quantum computer. Things want to be part of the universe. We all do, and so do atoms. Atoms especially are very sensitive. They're very happy to be part of larger systems. And so to isolate a quantum system from the universe is one of the challenges of quantum computing. Because we're dealing with individual atoms, as long as we can have a really good vacuum and only interact with them through light, we're able to then prevent them from coupling to the chamber and the world. We want to avoid noise, et cetera. And so by having a individual atom-based quantum computer, we find it easier to create environmental separation compared to, like, say, a solid-state system. I will now talk a bit about the challenge. As you know, I don't know if it was totally clear to everyone because there have been a few questions on the Slack. The challenges will not be formally revealed until tomorrow morning. The first thing I want to call out is you have a few ways to interact with IonQ during the course of the challenge. You'll have access to QBraid, and you can also use IonQ APIs directly. We're really happy either way, wherever you feel most comfortable. Along those lines, unlike pretty much everyone else in the quantum computing space, we're not pushing a particular library. We integrate it with kind of ones you probably have tried before, like Qiskit and Cirq, as well as many other libraries. And we'll link to a blog post about this so you can get set up today. You should use the tooling that you feel most comfortable with. And if it happens to be that there's a tool you love to use that does not integrate with our APIs today, although there probably isn't time to do that during this hackathon, please see one of us because we really do want to make sure that everyone's favorite tooling is easy to use on the platform. Okay. Secondly, as a matter of course, please simulate first. We are giving all of you and everyone at the hackathon access to all of our quantum computers, including what we believe is currently the world's best quantum computer, the IonQ Aria. And we want you to use it. We are excited for you to use it. However, there's a lot of you, and there's a lot of you can't see in the remote area. So please simulate first to test your code. Almost all of the tools we were just talking about have local simulators that you can just run on your laptop. So you shouldn't, feel at all. There's no shame, and in fact, there should be no need to integrate with anything to make a great challenge submission. We'd love for you to run on the hardware. We want you to run it on the hardware. We think that's really what's the most exciting part. But if you're feeling super anxious and it's like 4 a.m, don't fret. You should be able to simulate everything you need to potentially win the hackathon without running on hardware. We're not making that a strict requirement. We want to make it exciting, but not required. So even if you are connecting to our APIs through various tools, we have a number of backends available. We posted them here, and we'll have information in the Slack as well. You can use our simulator, so you can test your code end to end before you run it on our hardware. So again, recommend simulate locally, simulate on the back end to make sure everything's working properly, and then go to town on the hardware. And we're really excited to see what you do. It's important to remember all of your code, when it runs on the hardware, you are making laser beams, shoot at individual atoms floating in space down in Washington, DC. And so we want everyone to have the thrill of, commanding the power of the universe, but do simulate first. Okay. I strongly recommend everyone who is participating in this challenge or any challenge to make sure your environment is working correctly today. So please message us, join the IonQ channel on the Slack for the hackathon, or see one of the 3 of us now if you're having trouble. This is a great time to get your tools together. Make sure you can run a program. As we mentioned, you can either follow some of our blog posts or one of the many getting started tools like online, and just make sure you can make a Bell state, run it on a computer, run it on a simulator. Today would be a good time to do that. There's, let's see, the 3 of us plus Jason, who's not in the room right now, I think, and Corey will be here, and we'll be around the hackathon and also at the booth. And we're super happy to talk to you and help you get set up. Okay. So I can't talk about the actual challenge, but I did want to give you an important heads up, and then I'll take questions. Okay, so this challenge is going to be creative. That means there will not be a single right answer for the in-person challenge. So those of you listening who are doing the remote challenge will, because it's remote and because there's thousands of you, it will be graded, and that will have let's say a fitness function where there's a clear fitness for any particular submission. But for those of you participating in person, your result is subjective. So if that scares you, if you really like there being a definitive right answer, which, would be a cool, totally cool and normal, especially here, that is fine. But I want you to be aware of that in advance, in case you are still deciding what challenge you will finally select to do. This will be subjective and judged by myself, Cheyenne, Ian, Daiwei, and Jason and Corey. So the judge's impressions of your submission will be what matter, which could be a blessing or a curse. Okay, that's it. I will now take any questions. You're both in the same place, ironically. So how about the purple shirt was first? Yeah.
What's the catch of IonQ?
What's the catch? Oh, like I painted such a rosy, beautiful picture. Okay, yeah, that's a great question. Ion traps are slower. So when we were talking about those laser transitions earlier, we are physically driving motion in the atom. And that is an order of magnitude slower than, for example, superconducting qubits. So that is I think that's the biggest thing. Ion traps today are slower. There's a lot of theoretical work showing that it should be possible to do gates that are orders of magnitude faster. But today, generally, ion-trapped quantum computers, whether Quantinuums or ours or at Oxford, et cetera, are orders of magnitude better in fidelity, in the quality of operations, and in accordingly the depth and the breadth of the circuits that can be run, but they're more slow. The analogy is sort of like the superconducting solid state computers are like a Ferrari that breaks down when you pull it out of your driveway. So you can go really fast for a really short distance. The ion trap is like, a good Toyota Corolla that will get you there. Let's see, the gray shirt gentleman.
You may have answered that with your previous answer, but as far as like applications or when we're making something from this, what would you recommend we take into account for a tracked computer versus what we might do for a superconducting computer?
Yeah, I would definitely take advantage of the connectivity. Things that are not possible to run on a superconducting system should be possible in an ion trap world in terms of width and depth. Yeah, so most importantly, the ARIA system, will offer you 23 qubits and like hundreds of 2-qubit gates without, becoming pure noise. So you can do some much deeper circuits in that case. I think the other thing to be aware of is it is slower. So if all of you submit your answers at 9 in the morning or whatever, like it's not going to, or if you submit to the quantum computer to run on the quantum computer at 9 in the morning, you're not all going to run. So our strong advice is, submit as early as possible. Don't screw yourselves, but if you want things to run on the real hardware, the earlier you submit, the better. We won't be able to guarantee that everyone gets to run. Okay, I think the next person was this. Yes.
Oh, just to good point. Just to go back to what you said, can you handle the simulators up to like 23 qubits?
Yeah, no problem. And you should be able to simulate local, like 23 qubits. You should be able to do that in your web browser, probably. So yeah, you'll be fine.
You mentioned your 2-qubit gate, your XX gate.
Yes.
Does the fidelity change with respect to which qubits I'm looking around? I mean, is there a change, right? So
it's a great question. In practice, there are because the qubits are all the same. There are slight optical differences and slight variances in crosstalk. We do our best to suppress all crosstalk and make them really uniform. In practice, if you were to run, for example, in quantum computing, you may be familiar with this idea of gate set tomography, which is basically a very in-depth way to figure out like different kinds of noise in your system. If you were to run that, you will see differences, but for the purposes of a hackathon, it won't be material. So yeah, any pairs are fine. I will also notice we will compile to use the qubits in the best possible order. So you don't have to worry about that. If I go back to this picture, yeah, this one. Okay, so like here, for each system, we have picked the optimal 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. qubits. So if you submit like a 6-qubit program, which is totally reasonable, we will map that to the best 6 qubits to run on the chain for your problem. You don't have to worry about that. Sort of like how you don't have to think about transistors when you're compiling a C program or something. Cool. I think the next person was this. Yes, you. Yes, exactly. Okay, great. Classic. Okay, saw you first.
Yeah, so talking about single and 2-qubit gates, what are your best average fidelities for like different single and 2-qubit gates?
Oh, cool. We'll post that on the internet. I can say for harmony, I think you'll see, when you say best, sorry, the question was, and I should have been repeating these, and I apologize for people on the stream. I've really failed at doing that, but the question was about the best or average fidelity. So do you mean what we've ever seen, like in best performance, or like in average case?
Not like an edge case, but more
Typical, expected.
Yeah, like typical expected for like different gates too will have different fidelities. So
Yeah, that's right.
yeah, what would you expect when running like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So question is, what can you expect? There is an API that you can use to get kind of the most recent characterization, but For Harmony, basically for Harmony, you'll see like 99% fidelity on single qubit gates typically. So basically all single qubit rotations for almost all ion trap systems are very high fidelity because we're just driving this oscillation. And so as long as the timing is good, like the laser is well focused, et cetera, it's going to be fine. The 2 qubit gate, as for all systems, is where the least fidelity occurs. For Harmony, I think you'll see somewhere between 96 and 98%. For ARIA, it'll be like 99.3%. There was someone over here, yes.
Worry about the qubit mapping 16?
Yes, the question was, do we need to worry about qubit mappings? And the answer is no. No, you can worry about it if you want to. I mean, certainly I don't want to stop you from worrying, but typically if you submit a program, we will handle the mapping in an optimal way. And how many qubits do the 2 computers have is a great question. So the beauty of ion trap quantum computing is because we just have to load one more atom. They are reconfigurable, but typically, and for the hackathon, Harmony is configured, both Harmonies, there's 2 Harmonies, they're configured with 11 qubits, and ARIA will be configured with 23 qubits. Yes, in the middle.
So you said the 2 qubit gates, they're slower than you see on any typical superconducting. But the coherence side of the qubits, right? So
Yeah.
Where's that balance? How does that play off?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, yeah, one great benefit of ions at the qubit is the coherent time, while not literally infinite, is effectively infinite. The infidelity of the gates contributes to noise before we decohere. Because remember, they're clocks, right? The atomic clock is the source of all time in our lives, is being driven off of that qubit. And so we don't really expect decoherence to be an issue for you. The noise of your gate will overwhelm the system longer. So for example, if you take like a 99.3% fidelity gate and exponentiate that out, you can do hundreds of gates, but eventually it'll become pure noise, meaning your error will have accumulated to the point where you don't know where you are anymore. That point is long before decoherence. So yeah, coherence times against operations today for all ion trap systems that I know of is effectively infinite for all practical purposes. I think what is the time? Yeah, it's a huge amount of time. Like the spontaneous decay of a terbium is, it's just not really a consideration. Question over here in the green hat.
I was going to ask, what is the, like you were mentioning about quantum, I guess, like qubit moving, that you can just put it into how many qubits that you can put. What is the limitation for right now? Like, what is the bottleneck or scalability? Because you were talking incredible things, right?
Yeah.
200 qubits, 10 of them, 200.
Yeah, it's a great question. So the question is effectively, if these ions are so great, why can't we just have 1,000 qubits and break RSA and go home? As the chain gets longer, it gets floppier. The best way to think about the system is imagine it's like masses connected by springs. And so when you have a short chain, this is all sort of predictable. As the chain gets longer and longer, the best way to think about it is it literally gets floppier. And so that floppiness makes it more and more difficult to have those laser transitions do what you want. And so we have run gates on very long chains, but it is more practical to make your chain shorter. And this is sort of what we talked about kind of on our future roadmap, which I'll describe briefly. So there's another way to scale this, by the way. So like our friends at Quantinuum have, they just store their qubits on bigger and bigger traps. I believe their roadmap is eventually have a huge, a giant trap, not like this little deck of cards trap, but a really huge trap, and store all of your qubits, various places, and then zoom them to the center to do an operation. So they avoid the floppy problem by always having like a 2 qubit long chain. we're going in a different direction, which we think is easier because the chains can be smaller, where basically there's some number of ions that make for an optimal chain. Then you can have multiple chains that you move back and forth, if that makes sense, to do quantum operations. And so that each individual chain that you're doing operations on isn't so floppy, is highly performant by itself as it is like in a bigger group. And then at a certain point of scale, you will connect that as sort of like a QPU unit to others optically. So this is kind of the most important bottleneck, and the area of kind of most exciting engineering is what kind of we think of as photonic interconnects. So if you picture this chain again, we can illuminate any given atom and collect its light and send that over an optical fiber through a switch to entangle with a similar photon from a qubit across the room. So imagine there's a quantum computer over there and a quantum computer over here, and we're shining light on ions in both chains, and that light is collected and sent, and it's actually possible to entangle the photons through a regular commercial switch and thereby entangle the ion over there and the ion over here. And that's been done in a lab, and through that, we can actually run a gate across that line. Now, in practice, we wouldn't actually have them across the room. That's just to make it a more dramatic example. In practice, you can imagine hundreds of these units just connected by optical fibers. And basically, that's how you scale up to thousands of logical qubits through these individual units.
For a quick follow-up question, you were mentioning about the scalability problem, but you mentioned that it is really still operation point wise, and I think when you complete the activity result, it's just like 100,000 qubits required in millions. Are you thinking that like slowness is a problem at scaling?
Completely, yes. The question is, will slowness be a problem? And absolutely, and that's why a big area of research in the community and a big focus of engineering for us is making gates faster. There's a lot of subtlety there. You can always go faster by applying more laser power, but obviously in the limit, enough laser power is very destructive. So there are other techniques required and drawing from, for example, advances in theoretical physics to make gates faster, as well as engineering. Like the gates we have invented, I think, while I've been at IonQ, I think a few different ways of doing gates, and I think there are many more to discover. Okay, you had a chance. I feel like it's only fair to defer to you first. Yeah. That's a great question. And there are groups, in fact, doing kind of these more elaborate geometries. We believe there's a number of advantages from an engineering perspective in kind of expanding in one dimension and then scaling up through optical links. That's like an engineering decision. So it's sort of like, yeah, you will see, I believe, both in the academic context and in like the corporate context, folks attempting more fancy geometries. That is an active area of research for decades at this point, I think. But we believe the linear trap has a lot of advantages from an efficiency standpoint. In the back.
From a commercial perspective, the slowness of the gates, is that the only thing that's sort of considers a challenge when you're trying to have a lot of Q coming in and running on computers? Yeah, that's a great question. So it's a question of the commercial challenges of running a quantum computing business, and is the slow gate an issue? I think like for the Harmony systems, there's actually two issues. The gates are slower and the ion chain lifetimes aren't great. So you see this chain of atoms here, very beautiful chain. When we make a vacuum chamber, which is made of metal, there's like hydrogen atoms like left over from that process, and they're bouncing around in that vacuum. Like this is basically as good of a vacuum, at least for Harmony, as we knew how to make it at the time. And what that means is it's actually just classical physics. These are like a bunch of billiard balls lined up, and then you have a random bouncing ball that eventually knocks into them. So for Harmony, the ion chain melts, meaning a random hydrogen atom bonks into it and separates the ions.
with a high degree of kinetic energy once every 20 to 30 minutes on average. So we have constant stochastic chain loss, then we have to reload the chain and recalibrate. So Harmony's duty cycle is not great. Like 25% of the time it's running jobs, and the rest of the time it's recovering from these spontaneous events. For ARIA, we kind of greatly improved the vacuum, and there we're seeing chain lifetimes as multiple weeks. So that was just a huge step in engineering for us. And what that means is effectively, although the gate times are slow, you're not also experiencing the loss of the chain itself. And then the other part of the duty cycle is just calibrating to run the best possible gates. So without going deep into the physics, you can basically think of the ion chain physics as like changing a little bit over time due to various things happening, like actually at the atomic level. And of course, nothing is more sensitive than like a subatomic particle. Like if we're having this conversation, the quantum computer is over here, and we just have like an oscilloscope hooked up to the ions, we will see like the noise of our conversation like on them because they're quite sensitive. So these very small, subtle changes in lasers expanding and contracting, charging on the trap, et cetera, are like affecting the gates. We have to periodically take empirical measurements and recalibrate how we do our gates for optimal, to get those really high fidelities that ion traps are famous for. So that eats up some of the duty cycle. But in ARIA, it's basically much more percentage of the time is spent running operations versus calibrating, and virtually no time is spent reloading. Cool. This person. Yes.
What's the status on mid-circuit measurements?
Oh yeah, the question is, what is the status on a mid-circuit measurement? Meaning, let's see, maybe this picture is better. At least there's a little diagram in the corner. If I just fast forward, maybe, and then pause. Can I pause? Yeah. Oh man. Okay. So, what you notice here in this block diagram of a circuit it's linear. It just goes from start to finish. Mid-circuit measurement is when we stop in the middle, pull off a single qubit, measure it, and then change what we're doing based on that classical measurement. So basically, it's combining classical and quantum computing, where let's say we measure the fourth qubit, we see it's a 0, and then we do different instructions based on the results of that. It ends up being like, most famously, one of the key prerequisites to doing quantum error correction. I can't speak publicly about like the current state of things. I can just say that it's on our roadmap, and we have like we have like a clear path to mid-circuit measurement, which has been demonstrated, by Quantinuum, obviously, and it's available on their systems, which fundamentally, being ion trap systems, use quite similar physics.
It's not something we can implement now.
Yes, you will not be able to do mid-circuit measurement in this challenge. That is correct. Yeah, so the question was, how does it affect the calibration time? The nice thing is it actually has no calibration impact. Effectively, there is some slowdown for mid-circuit measurement, because basically what you have to do, in our case, if you think about that chain of ions, to do mid-circuit measurement, we're going to take an individual ion, separate it from the rest, so it's in a separate quantum system and isn't going to affect them. We illuminate it with a laser. The others don't see that laser. They're still in their quantum superposition. That one ion is collapsed and it becomes a classical measurement at that point. So there's some time to pull it away, measure it, and then continue. That's it. So no calibration impact, because we're just doing the same measurement we normally do. We're just doing it in the middle of the circuit. So yeah, it shouldn't be like material from a calibration perspective.
Does that not affect the rest of the
Yeah, exactly. So the key of doing mid-circuit measurement is you have some quantum superposition, and then you're going to collapse a single qubit, and you have to pull it away from the rest without them being affected. Because if we measure all of them, then that's it. Once we measure, we cannot keep doing quantum stuff on any given qubit. Sure.
Looking around the room, all these people are doing this challenge.
Woo.
And then take that stuff like 30 to 50 feet, like what if they were all running shots that have, or like runs that have like 1,000 shots, each one to get a decent approximation of 35 stations? Like, are you concerned at all with like just backlogs and the issue to access the buffer?
I mean, if students, and I know most of y'all are students, if students are still the way they were when I was in college, then I would expect everyone to submit at the last possible moment. So yes. I am concerned. That's why I encourage those of you who are extremely diligent. If you're the kind of person, the rare person that I've always admired who does their homework ahead of time, please submit early. We do have 3 quantum computers available, Harmony 1, Harmony 2, and Aria for the challenge. And so we're hoping they're exclusively available to MIT. We're not going to be running anything for anyone else over the weekend. So our hope is that it's sufficient. But again, if your diligence is like it used to be, then I do expect there to be some issues. So if that does happen to you, do not fret. Please feel free to reach out to us on Slack. If you're having any trouble, we'll do what we can. In the absolute worst case, you do have access to simulators. I think this person in the blue.
Okay, and limitation to how many computer gates can be run in parallel.
So there's no parallel. We have demonstrated and executed parallel gates on our systems, but we're not making that available during this challenge. So you can design your circuit however you want, but the 2 qubit gates will run in series, not in parallel. No limit. Obviously, at a certain point, it will become pure noise, but you should be able to do hundreds of gates in Aria and like tens of gates in Harmony.
That's kind of an option for like many different modalities and some sort of. Do you think it's more plausible in ions versus
The nice thing about ions is they fluoresce automatically. So there's no D to A or some kind of conversion, right? Like the exact process that we use to perform a quantum operation causes them, if we want, to emit light, which is just to shine laser on them. So we're not adding any complexity to that setup in that sense. So I would say I would be surprised if superconducting systems used photonic interconnects for their scaling. I think it will be something else. Sure.
What about hybrids and interconnected being classical? In just one place like IonQ was GPU, like the CPU, or kind of.
Yeah, so the question was basically, might we see a hybrid world of different modalities of quantum computer? I think it's very possible. And there's a lot of other technologies that might integrate with these systems. For example, ions are great quantum sensors also. And so there's definitely been discussion about, you could do native, quantum DSP sort of by connecting quantum sensors directly to ions by coupling them directly through light. So I think in terms of hybrid superconducting ion trap systems, I think it's a really interesting question. I'm sure there are national labs or large research institutions thinking about that. I think from our perspective, the kind of hybrid we mostly talk about is between classical and quantum. So today's quantum computers being noisy, as probably most of you know, one of the ways to get more yield and value out of your quantum computer is to pair it with a classical computer. Sort of like how for your GPU, nobody just has a GPU by itself. You have your GPU working with your CPU to do something, and you offload certain calculations to the GPU that it can accelerate. Quantum computer is a great linear algebra accelerator. So we could imagine a world where, certainly for larger computers, and perhaps in the future when quantum computers are smaller, many computers have some kind of QPU processing unit to take on certain calculations that are much more efficient on the quantum computer.
I think because CPU means that you're doing a lot of art stuff and big applications and you can't be a lot of science fully connected, which is incredibly good for columns. But I can't predict quasi different architectures get someone That's what I mean.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. You all know, has anyone actually attempted that? Scientists? The interconnection of like superconducting and trapped ion systems. Has anyone actually attempted to do like a simultaneous hybrid superconducting trapped ion computer?
There has been some neutral atoms and ion
Yes.
hybrid systems, I guess. They're atoms like, so that's easier, but I also wasn't aware of the superconducting design.
Yeah, the answer for those on the stream is basically people have done some neutral atom quantum computing trapped ion coupling, which makes sense because they're both atomic. But that's all we know of in the room right now. Is that a question in the back or a sign that I'm going to get kicked out? Okay.
How possible is it to directly control the laser? Like, can you give it an analog waveforms? Or to what extent can you digitally or analog control the laser all the time?
A great question. The question is, can you control the laser? Currently, because lasers are dangerous and can destroy things, we do not make them publicly available for others to control directly. So you will shoot laser beams if you give us programs to run, but we control the pulses. If you are part of an academic group or company group or whatever that is interested in doing custom pulses, please see us. During the hackathon, that won't be available, but we're always open to collaborating on things of that nature. But we find most folks are much happier to think at a higher level and let the analog stuff be like a black box.
So the system supposed to the system. You can arbitrarily pick a pair and then create a correlation between them.
Yeah.
With the two laser beams, but the laser beams have to be coming from the same source, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yes. And so basically what's happening is we actually have kind of two different architectures. And I don't have a picture of it here, unfortunately. Basically, our latest systems use what is called like an acoustic optical deflector or AOD to steer laser beams, sort of like laser cannons on like the Death Star or whatever. And so there you have a single laser that is split and steered and modulated. Yeah.
So is that the reason for electric? That's one C0 or one companion, whatever.
In parallel.
One
So no, we can, in fact, on like ARIA, for example, there's 32 channels of laser beam. So we can actually illuminate all 32 ions in a trap if we wanted to simultaneously and do some really fancy gates. Here's maybe an intuitive explanation why it's a little trickier. So the way the entangling gates work is with motion, like we were talking about. And effectively, when we do more and more in parallel, we need more power and it takes longer to settle. So we're talking about how we need everything to return to the way it used to be at the end of the gate. And so basically parallel gates, it is a speed up, but it requires more laser power and it's not like a pure parallelization. So for example, let's say a single gate takes unit 1 to do, 2 gates in parallel don't take unit 1, maybe it takes unit 1.5 or 1.2 or something. Does that make sense? So consequently, because it needs more power and it isn't like a 100% speed up, we think it's generally better to focus on getting higher quality results, if that makes sense. I think like parallel operations is super interesting, but we haven't found it to be like the top priority for most of our customers who are interested in just being able to run like very deep circuits as opposed to like, the fastest possible circuit.
Some sort of filtration system where you can study what kind of program they're trying to run, and then based upon similarities, continue the operation versus completely going back to the operations.
Oh, yeah. the way to think about how we calibrate is it is actually quite like that. ARIA, for example, will calibrate to be able to run every gate, and then it has like kind of a heuristic for how long it can run without calibrating before like drifts accumulate beyond like a point we consider acceptable. So you can sort of think of it as like, if your car is well aligned, suppose you drive and you just drive on the highway and you take your hands off the steering wheel and it's, not a Tesla, it'll go straight, but probably be veering to one side or another. And at a certain point, you'll crash. And so the calibration window is basically based on how long it can run on that straightaway before we think it's in danger of kind of veering off that like optimally calibrated state. So the program submitted shouldn't make a material difference for ARIA. Cool. If there's no more questions, I'll just mention, we'll talk about it more at the very end of the hackathon, but if you are already out of school or you're going to be out of school soon, or you want to be out of school, we're hiring, although stay in school, please. And we also do have an internship program. Our formal application online is closed, but if you're interested in internship, we do still have internships available and we can probably sneak you by the regular process. I forgot this was streaming, but don't tell anyone that. Just please see us during the hackathon or after the hackathon. We'd love to have you as an intern now or in the future. Life is very long, or working with us. So thank you for coming and looking forward to seeing what you all do this weekend.